The rain drummed against Jack Turner's windshield as he guided his old pickup truck along the winding country road. Lightning split the darkening sky, followed by a rumble of thunder that seemed to shake the very ground. He squinted through the downpour, his weathered hands gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. It had been a long day at the garage. 3 oil changes, a transmission rebuild, and a stubborn carburetor that had taken twice as long as expected. All he wanted now was to get home to Emily. She'd be waiting with her homework spread across the kitchen table, probably wondering where he was. Another flash of lightning illuminated the road ahead, and that's when he saw it. Hazard lights blinking weakly through the curtain of rain. A car sat tilted at an awkward angle, half in the ditch that ran alongside the road. Jack's foot eased off the accelerator. Emily would understand, wouldn't she? He'd already called to say he'd be late. But this was different. Someone needed help. With a weary sigh, he pulled over, flicking on his own hazard lights. The rain intensified as he stepped out of his truck, soaking through his work shirt in seconds. He approached the stranded vehicle, a sleek sedan that looked out of place on these rural roads. Tapping gently on the driver's window, Jack bent down to peer inside. A woman sat there, elegant even in distress, her hands clutched tightly around the steering wheel. She lowered the window, and Jack could see the relief wash over her face. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked, rain running down his face. "Yes, I hydroplaned. The car just went right off the road." Her voice was steady despite her obvious shock. "I've been sitting here hoping someone would come along." "Let me take a look," Jack offered, already moving to assess the situation. The right front tire was buried in mud, but the car seemed undamaged. "I think I can pull you out. I've got some chains in my truck." The woman watched through her window as Jack trudged back to his pickup. His movements were efficient, practiced, the motions of someone who'd done this countless times before. He returned with heavy chains and began securing them between the vehicles. "You might want to step out, ma'am," he called through the rain. Just in case. She emerged carefully, holding a designer handbag over her head in a futile attempt to stay dry. Jack couldn't help but notice how out of place she looked, her tailored outfit and city sophistication a stark contrast to the muddy rural roadside. "I'm Claire," she said, extending her free hand. "Claire Whitmore." "Jack Turner," he replied, giving her hand a quick shake before returning to work. "Own the garage in town." The extraction took less than 10 minutes. Jack's truck, though old, had plenty of power, and he knew exactly how to angle the pull. Soon her car was back on solid pavement, unscathed except for some mud along the side. As Claire inspected her rescued vehicle, she turned to Jack with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You remind me of someone I once knew," she said softly, almost to herself. Jack shifted uncomfortably, rain still pouring down his face. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card, the edges slightly worn. "If you have any trouble with the car, here's my number. The garage is just off Main Street." "Thank you," Claire said, taking the card. "You didn't have to stop. Not in weather like this." Jack shrugged, already heading back to his truck. "Couldn't leave you stranded out here. Drive careful now." The remainder of his drive home was uneventful, though his clothes were thoroughly soaked. By the time he pulled into his driveway, the porch light was on, casting a warm glow through the rain. It was later than he'd planned, much later. Jack's boots squeaked against the floor as he entered the house. Emily sat at the kitchen table, exactly as he'd pictured her. Textbooks and notebooks spread out before her, but instead of the welcome he'd hoped for, she barely looked up. "There's leftover pasta in the microwave," she said, her pencil scratching against paper. Again. "Emily, I'm sorry. There was someone broken down on—" "There's always someone broken down," she cut him off, still not meeting his eyes. "Or a car that needs finishing, or a favor for Mrs. Henderson, or whatever." Jack stood dripping in the doorway, water pooling around his feet. The distance between them seemed far greater than the few steps to the kitchen table. "I couldn't just drive past. It was pouring rain. And I know, Dad." Emily's voice softened slightly, but the hurt remained. "You can't help helping people. I get it." She gathered her books, finally looking up at him. Her eyes, so much like her mother's, held a mixture of love and disappointment that made his chest ache. "I've got a test tomorrow. I should get some sleep. She paused at the bottom of the stairs. Don't forget to eat something. Jack watched her disappear upstairs, listening to her footsteps overhead. The house felt too quiet now, filled only with the sound of rain against windows and the hollow tick of the kitchen clock. He moved to the sink, staring out the window into the darkness. His reflection looked back at him, tired and worn. The strange woman's words echoed in his mind. You remind me of someone I once knew. The microwave hummed as it heated his dinner, but Jack barely noticed. He kept seeing Emily's face, the way she'd looked at him, like she was used to disappointment, used to being second to everyone else's needs. The realization sat heavy in his stomach, harder to bear than the weight of his soaked clothes. Morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows of the Turner home, catching the dancing particles of flour that floated through the air. The sizzle of butter on the griddle filled the small space, as Jack flipped another golden brown pancake onto the growing stack. The familiar rhythm of breakfast preparation helped ease the lingering tension from the night before. Emily sat at the worn kitchen table, her math textbook pushed aside. She watched her father work, his movements precise and practiced. Just like when he fixed cars, the smell of breakfast wrapped around them like a warm blanket. Here you go, kiddo. Jack placed a plate stacked with pancakes in front of Emily. Extra chocolate chips. Just the way you like them. Emily's face softened. Thanks, Dad. She drowned the stack in maple syrup, the way she always had since she was little. We're working on a new song in choir today. It's pretty challenging. Yeah? Jack settled into his chair across from her, his own plate more modestly portioned. What's this one about? It's called After the Storm. Kind of funny, considering last night's weather. Emily took a bite, chewing thoughtfully. Then, as if she couldn't hold it in any longer, she blurted, Dad, someone was watching you last night. I saw her from Maddie's porch. She looked at you like she knew you. Jack's fork paused halfway to his mouth. What do you mean? I was at Maddie's house after school, remember? Her porch faces Mason Road. We saw you stop to help that lady. Emily leaned forward, her eyes intense. She wasn't just watching you work on her car. She was watching you. Jack shrugged, trying to keep his voice casual. Probably just grateful for the help. Not many people want to stop in weather like that. No, Dad. It was different. Emily pushed her pancakes around her plate. The way she looked at you. It was like she was seeing a ghost. Jack cleared his throat and stood up, gathering his empty plate. Your imagination's running wild again, Em. Better hurry up, or you'll be late for school. At work, the morning brought a steady stream of customers to Turner's garage. Jack buried himself in the familiar comfort of engines and tools, but he couldn't shake Emily's words. The local gossip didn't help either. Heard you played knight in shining armor last night, Mrs. Henderson said as she dropped off her ancient Volvo for its regular oil change. Fancy woman in that nice car, wasn't she? Just helping someone in need, Mrs. Henderson. Jack wiped his hands on a shop rag. Nothing more to it. Noth. But throughout the day, similar comments trickled in. In a small town like theirs, news traveled faster than summer lightning. By lunch, Jack had heard 3 different versions of the previous night's events, each more elaborate than the last. The afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the garage floor when Jack noticed something white beneath the door. He picked up what turned out to be a cream-colored envelope, the paper thick and expensive feeling between his oil-stained fingers. Inside was a card with elegant handwriting that flowed across the page like water. Thank you for your kindness in the storm. Some angels wear work boots and carry socket wrenches. There was no signature, but Jack knew. The woman from the rain. It had to be her. He tucked the card into his shirt pocket, unsure why his heart was beating a little faster. That evening, after a simple dinner of spaghetti and meatballs, Emily helped Jack with the dishes. The kitchen was quiet except for the clinking of plates and the running water. Jack could sense his daughter wanted to say something. She had that same look her mother used to get when she was gathering courage. Dad? Emily finally spoke, drying a plate with slow, deliberate movements. What was Mom like when she was my age? Jack's hands stilled in the soapy water. These questions always caught him off guard, even though they shouldn't. Your mom? He reached for another dish, buying time. Well, she was. She was a good student. No, that's not what I mean. Emily set down her towel. Was she in choir like me? Did she like music? What made her laugh? Jack felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came with these conversations. It was a long time ago, Em. He pulled the plug, watching the water spiral down the drain. I didn't know her then. We met after high school. But surely she told you stories, Emily pressed. About when she was 15? I've got some paperwork to finish up, Jack said, already moving toward his small home office. Don't stay up too late, okay? Emily stood alone in the kitchen, watching her father retreat. Her eyes landed on the cream-colored card propped against the coffee maker, the one her father thought she hadn't noticed him bringing home. She moved closer, tilting her head to read the elegant script through the envelope's translucent paper. Her fingers reached out to touch it, but she pulled back at the last second. Instead, she remained still, staring at the mysterious thank you note, wondering about the woman who had watched her father in the rain, and thinking about all the questions about her mother that remained unanswered. The late morning sun cast long shadows across the garage floor as Jack Turner wiped grease from his hands. The familiar scent of motor oil and rubber hung in the air while he finished up paperwork at his small desk. The bell above the entrance door chimed, and he looked up to see Claire Whitmore walking in, carrying a cardboard drink carrier and a paper bag. "Good morning," she said with a warm smile. "I thought you might need some fuel yourself." Jack straightened, caught off guard by her presence. She looked different in the daylight, elegant in a simple blue dress, her silver-streaked hair neatly pulled back. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, automatically reaching for a work order form. "Is the car giving you trouble? Claire, please." She set the items on his desk, careful to avoid the scattered papers. "And no car troubles. I just wanted to properly thank you for the other night. Coffee and fresh muffins from Marie's Bakery. I asked around for the local favorite." Jack hesitated, then gestured to the worn chair across from his desk. "You didn't have to do that. I know." She sat down and started unpacking the treats. But sometimes wanting to do something is reason enough. The rich aroma of coffee filled the small office space. Jack accepted the cup she offered, watching as she arranged blueberry muffins on a napkin. "Actually," Claire continued, her voice softening, "I have another reason for coming by. It's about Sarah, your wife." Jack's hand tightened around the coffee cup. "You knew Sarah. She saved my life." Claire's eyes grew distant with memory. "It was 15 years ago. I had a medical emergency while passing through town. Sarah was volunteering at the clinic that day. Claire's voice caught. She noticed symptoms everyone else missed. Got me to the hospital just in time. Claire's voice caught. Jack sat back, a familiar ache blooming in his chest. That sounds like Sarah. She always noticed things others didn't. I've been trying to find her for years, to thank her properly. Claire's fingers traced the lid of her coffee cup. When I finally tracked down this town, I learned she had passed. I'm so sorry, Jack. Before he could respond, the door chimed again. Emily burst in, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Dad, choir practice got canceled, and I thought maybe we could. She stopped short, noticing Claire. Hi there, Claire said warmly. You must be Emily. I'm Claire Whitmore. Emily's eyes lit up with recognition. You're the lady from the rainstorm. I saw Dad help you the other night. Emily, Jack started. But Claire smiled. That's right. Your father was quite the hero. Would you like a muffin? There are plenty to share. Emily dropped her backpack and pulled up another chair, instantly at ease. Did you know my mom? She asked, reaching for a muffin. Claire glanced at Jack before answering. I did briefly. She helped me during a difficult time. What was she like? Emily leaned forward eagerly. Dad doesn't talk about her much. Jack felt his throat tighten, but Claire handled the question with grace. She was incredibly kind. The sort of person who really saw people, you know? And she had the most wonderful laugh. It made everyone around her want to laugh too. Emily soaked up every word, asking more questions. Jack watched as Claire shared careful stories about Sarah's compassion, her volunteer work at the clinic, the way she could brighten a room. His daughter's face glowed with each new detail about the mother she barely remembered. After about an hour, Emily reluctantly gathered her things for homework. Will you come back sometime? She asked Claire. I'd love to hear more stories. If your father doesn't mind, Claire replied, looking to Jack. He nodded, unable to deny the joy in his daughter's eyes. After Emily left for home, Jack walked Claire to her car parked outside the garage. Thank you, he said quietly, for sharing those memories with Emily. She doesn't have many of her own. Claire paused by her car door, her expression troubled. Jack, there's something else you should know. She took a deep breath. Something Sarah told me during that time at the clinic. The afternoon sun felt suddenly too bright, too harsh. Jack waited. Sarah. Claire's voice dropped to nearly a whisper. She told me she had planned to leave town before Emily was born. The words hit Jack like a physical blow. He stood frozen, unable to process what he'd just heard. I thought you should know, Claire said softly, then slipped into her car and drove away. Jack barely remembered closing up the garage or driving home. That night, he lay in bed, staring at the framed photo on his nightstand. Sarah's smile beamed back at him, her arms wrapped around a toddler Emily at the county fair. The same photo that had brought him comfort for years now seemed to mock him with its perfect happiness. He studied Sarah's face in the dim light, searching for signs he might have missed. Had she been unhappy? Was their entire marriage built on obligation after she decided to stay? The questions circled his mind like hungry wolves, tearing at everything he thought he knew about their life together. Emily's laughter echoed from downstairs as she watched TV. The sound, usually a comfort, now twisted something deep in his chest. How close had he come to never hearing that laugh at all? To never having his daughter in his life? The family photo stared back at him, offering no answers, while doubt gnawed at the edges of his world. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen curtains, casting a warm glow that did nothing to brighten Jack's mood. He sat at the worn wooden table, pushing scrambled eggs around his plate without eating. The revelation from yesterday weighed heavy on his mind, making even the simple act of breakfast feel like a chore. Emily watched her father from across the table, her own plate barely touched. Dad? Are you okay? She asked, concern etched on her young face. I'm fine, Jack muttered, not meeting her eyes. Just tired. Is it because of Mrs. Whitmore's visit yesterday? Jack's fork clattered against his plate. Let's not talk about that right now. Emily's shoulders slumped, but she pressed on. She seemed really nice, and she knew Mom. Emily. Jack cut her off, his voice sharp. I need to get to work. At the garage, Jack threw himself into his tasks with desperate intensity. The familiar routine of checking engines and changing oil offered a temporary escape from his troubled thoughts. By mid-morning, his hands were covered in grease, and his shirt was stained with sweat. The bell above the door chimed. Jack's stomach tightened when he saw Claire walking in, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. I thought we could talk, she said softly, setting 1 cup on his workbench. Jack wiped his hands on a rag. I'm pretty busy. Please, Jack. There's more you need to understand about Sarah. The mention of his wife's name made him pause. Claire took advantage of his hesitation and continued. Sarah wasn't perfect. She struggled with fear, with uncertainty. But she chose to stay, Jack. She chose you. How would you know? Jack's voice was rough. You weren't here. You weren't here. No, but I was there when she was at her lowest. She called me one night, terrified of the future. But do you know what she said? Claire's eyes were earnest. She said her faith would see her through, that her love for you was stronger than her fear. Jack turned away, his hands gripping the edge of the workbench. Why are you telling me this now? Because you deserve to know the whole truth. Sarah's choice to stay wasn't just about duty, it was about love and faith. Before Jack could respond, Emily burst through the door, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Her face lit up when she saw Claire. Mrs. Whitmore, I didn't know you'd be here, Claire smiled warmly. Hello, Emily. I was just talking to your father. Did you tell him more about Mom? Emily asked eagerly, dropping her backpack by the door. Jack watched as his daughter gravitated toward Claire, hanging on her every word. Something twisted in his chest, pride, pain, or maybe both, as Claire shared a story about Sarah's high school choir days, making Emily laugh. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of oil changes and tire rotations. When evening came, Jack suggested they grab dinner at Miller's Diner, hoping the familiar comfort food might ease the tension of the day. As soon as they walked in, Jack felt the weight of stares. Mrs. Miller, usually chatty and warm, gave them a tight smile as she led them to a booth. The usual dinner crowd's conversations dropped to whispers. "Did you hear about Turner and that city woman? Showing up at his garage every day now. Sarah's barely been gone 5 years." Emily slid lower in her seat, her face flushing. Jack could hear every murmur, every judgmental tone. His coffee cup rattled slightly as he set it down, his hands shaking with suppressed anger. "Maybe we should go," Emily whispered. Jack nodded curtly, throwing some bills on the table. They walked home under the deepening twilight, the sound of their footsteps echoing on the empty sidewalk. More whispers followed them from the diner's windows. Emily reached for his hand, something she hadn't done in years. "Dad?" Jack's fists clenched and unclenched at his sides. The town's judgment he could handle, but Sarah's secret? The possibility that their entire marriage had been built on uncertainty? That was harder to bear. He looked down at his daughter's worried face and forced himself to relax his hands. "It's okay, Em," he said, though they both knew it wasn't. "Let's just get home." They walked the rest of the way in silence, followed by the weight of unspoken words and the echo of whispered gossip. Jack's mind churned with questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered, while the ghost of Sarah's choice to stay or to go haunted every step. Saturday morning brought a gentle breeze through the open windows of the Turner home. Emily stood in front of her mirror, holding up 2 different dresses, her brow furrowed in concentration. One was navy blue with white polka dots, the other a simple pale yellow sundress that had once belonged to her mother. "Dad," Emily called out. "Is it okay if Claire comes over? I need help picking something for choir rehearsal." Jack paused in the hallway, coffee mug halfway to his lips. The thought of Claire in his house made his stomach twist, but Emily's hopeful expression in the mirror's reflection was hard to resist. "Sure," he managed, though the word felt thick in his throat. Within the hour, Claire's silver sedan pulled into their driveway. She stepped out wearing a casual summer dress, carrying a small box that made Emily's eyes light up with curiosity. "I brought some accessories," Claire explained as Emily ushered her inside. "Your mom always said the right necklace could make any outfit special." Jack lingered in the kitchen, pretending to read the newspaper while keeping an ear tuned to the cheerful voices drifting from Emily's room. The sound of his daughter's laughter, genuine, unrestrained laughter, made his heart ache in a way he couldn't quite understand. "Oh my goodness," Claire's voice carried down the hall. "That yellow dress. Sarah had one just like it when we were teenagers. She wore it to every choir practice." "Really?" Emily's excitement was palpable. "Mom was in choir too? Was she ever? Your mother had the most beautiful voice. She used to practice in her backyard, and the neighbors would open their windows just to listen." Jack found himself drawn to Emily's doorway, watching as Claire helped adjust the yellow dress on Emily's shoulders. His daughter twirled, the fabric swishing around her knees, her face glowing with joy. For a moment, she looked so much like Sarah that it stole his breath. "There," Claire said, fastening a delicate silver chain around Emily's neck. "Now you're ready to shine, just like your mom used to." The tenderness in Claire's voice, the way Emily beamed at her reflection, it stirred something complicated in Jack's chest. Pride, yes, but also a gnawing fear that somehow he was becoming less necessary in his daughter's life. Later that morning, Jack threw himself into work at the garage, trying to lose himself in the familiar rhythm of tools and engines. The sound of approaching footsteps made him look up from under the hood of Mrs. Henderson's ancient Buick. Rick Dawson stood there, arms crossed, a smirk twisting his features. Well, if it isn't the town's favorite charity case." Jack straightened slowly, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "What do you want, Rick?" "Just wondering how you managed to catch the eye of that fancy city woman." Rick's voice dripped with mock curiosity. "Must be nice, having someone feel so sorry for you. The poor widower and his half-breed kid." Jack's fingers tightened around the wrench in his hand, knuckles turning white. The slur against Emily made his blood boil, but he forced himself to take a steady breath. "You're not welcome here, Rick. Truth hurts, doesn't it?" Rick sneered. "She'll get bored playing mommy soon enough." "They always do." Jack turned his back, focusing on the engine in front of him, though his hands shook slightly. He listened to Rick's retreating footsteps, each one leaving behind a residue of anger and hurt that settled deep in his bones. The rest of the day passed in a blur of oil changes and tire rotations. When Jack finally made it home, Emily was practicing her choir music in the living room, the yellow dress carefully hung up for next week's rehearsal. "Thanks, Dad," she said suddenly, stopping mid-song. "For what?" "For letting Claire help today. It meant a lot." Emily's smile was soft and sincere. "She makes me feel closer to Mom somehow." Jack managed to return her smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm glad, sweetheart." Later that night, Jack lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet except for the distant hum of crickets through his open window. Emily's words echoed in his mind. "She makes me feel closer to Mom somehow." He turned onto his side, facing the empty space where Sarah used to sleep. Was he doing the right thing, letting Claire into their lives? Or was he slowly becoming unnecessary, watching from the sidelines as another woman stepped into the role he'd tried so hard to fill? The questions chased themselves around his mind, keeping sleep at bay as the night stretched on. On his nightstand, the small family photo seemed to mock him, Sarah's bright smile, Emily as a toddler, his own younger face unmarked by grief and doubt. He reached out and turned it face down, then immediately felt guilty and set it right again. In the darkness, Jack Turner lay awake, a man caught between gratitude and fear, unable to tell which emotion would win in the end. The autumn air buzzed with excitement at Morrison Park. Red and orange leaves danced around wooden booths, decorated with twinkling lights and harvest bunting. The annual festival was in full swing, filling the evening with the sweet scent of apple pies and the sound of children's laughter. Jack Turner stood near the electrical panel, watching the festivities from a distance. He'd volunteered to help with the technical side of things. It was easier than mingling. His weathered hands held a clipboard with the festival's maintenance checklist, but his eyes kept drifting to Emily. His daughter stood with the school choir on the makeshift stage, her voice blending with the others as they practiced for their evening performance. Claire sat in the front row, giving Emily encouraging smiles. Jack couldn't help but notice how Emily's face lit up at Claire's presence. "Hey Jack, we need more extension cords for the pie contest area," called Tom, one of the festival organizers. Jack nodded, grateful for the distraction. As he headed toward the supply shed, dark clouds began rolling in from the west. "Looks like rain," muttered Mrs. Peterson at her pie booth. "Hope it holds off till after the performances." But nature had other plans. The first drops fell just as Emily's choir took their positions. Then the sky opened up, sending festival-goers scrambling for cover under the canvas tents. Thunder cracked overhead, making some children cry out in surprise. Suddenly, everything went dark. The festival lights, the stage spotlights, even the street lamps, all dead. Panic rippled through the crowd as parents called out for their children in the darkness. "Everyone stay calm." Jack's voice cut through the chaos. He pulled out his flashlight and jogged toward the main generator behind the stage. Rain pelted his jacket, but he barely noticed. This scene felt familiar. Him, the rain, and something that needed fixing. Claire appeared beside him holding an umbrella. "What can I do to help?" "Hold the light steady," he said, already kneeling by the generator. His hands moved with practiced certainty, checking connections and testing wires. The rain made everything slippery, but Jack worked methodically, his focus absolute. Emily joined them, her choir dress getting soaked. "Dad, you can fix it, right?" "Always do, sweetheart," he replied, not looking up from his work. His fingers found the problem, a blown fuse and some water damage. Within minutes, he had bypassed the damaged section and rewired the backup system. The generator hummed to life. One by one, the festival lights flickered back on, drawing cheers from the crowd. The darkness retreated, replaced by the warm glow of string lights reflecting off the rain-slicked grass. "My dad's a hero," Emily announced proudly to anyone who would listen. Several people patted Jack on the back as he stood up, his clothes dripping. "Just doing my job," he mumbled. But he couldn't help smiling. Claire squeezed his arm gently, her eyes full of warmth. "Sarah would be so proud," she whispered. For once, hearing Sarah's name didn't sting. Instead, it felt right, like a missing piece clicking into place. The three of them stood there in the rain, him, Emily, and Claire, and for a brief moment, Jack felt completely at peace. The festival continued despite the weather. Emily's choir performed under hastily rigged tarps, their voices rising clear and strong above the pattering rain. Jack watched from the back, his heart swelling with pride as Emily hit every note perfectly. Later that night, after driving Emily home and making sure she was tucked in bed, Jack found himself restless. The house felt too quiet after the festival's excitement. He climbed up to the attic, telling himself he needed to check for leaks from the storm. The old wooden stairs creaked under his weight. Jack pulled the dangling light cord, illuminating the dusty space. Cardboard boxes lined the walls, each containing pieces of his life with Sarah. He hadn't been up here in months. A water-stained box in the corner caught his eye. It held Sarah's old papers. Bills, cards, letters she'd saved. Jack sat cross-legged on the floor and began sorting through them, not sure what he was looking for until he found it. The envelope was sealed, never opened, addressed to him in Sarah's familiar handwriting. The postmark showed a date from 16 years ago, just before Emily was born. With trembling fingers, Jack broke the seal. The paper inside was crisp, preserved by the envelope. Sarah's words, written in blue ink, seemed to float off the page. Dear Jack, I'm sitting at the bus station as I write this. My ticket is in my pocket, a one-way trip to Chicago. I've been thinking about leaving for weeks now, dreaming of a different life. Jack's vision blurred. He blinked hard, forcing himself to keep reading. The letter confirmed everything Claire had said. Sarah had planned to leave him, had even bought the ticket. The life he thought they'd shared suddenly felt like a lie. His hands shook as he held the letter under the dim attic bulb. Tears fell onto the paper, making the ink run in tiny rivers. Outside, the storm had passed, but inside Jack's heart, a new tempest was raging. The same hands that had so confidently fixed the generator now couldn't stop trembling. The hero of the festival sat alone in his attic, surrounded by boxes of memories he could no longer trust, while his daughter slept peacefully below, unaware that her world was about to change again. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window, casting long golden rectangles across the worn linoleum floor, but its warmth couldn't penetrate the coldness that had settled over the Turner household like a winter fog. Jack sat hunched at the breakfast table, his broad shoulders curved inward as if trying to protect himself from an invisible blow. His coffee sat untouched, steam rising from the chipped ceramic mug that Emily had made him in 3rd grade, the one with "World's Best Dad" painted in crooked blue letters. The discovered letter from last night felt like it was burning a hole in his shirt pocket, the paper seeming to pulse against his chest with each heartbeat. The house creaked around him, settling into the familiar rhythms of a Sunday morning. Somewhere upstairs, water ran through old pipes as Emily got ready for the day. The refrigerator hummed its steady tune, and outside, Mrs. Henderson's rooster crowed his belated morning song. Normal sounds of a normal day, but nothing felt normal anymore. Emily bounced into the kitchen like a ray of sunshine, her face still glowing from yesterday's festival triumph. She wore her favorite blue sweater, the soft cashmere one with tiny pearl buttons that Sarah had bought her for her 13th birthday, just months before she passed. It had been an extravagance they couldn't really afford, but Sarah had insisted, saying every girl needed something beautiful that made her feel special. Dad, everyone's still talking about how you saved the festival. Emily's voice bubbled with excitement as she pulled out her chair. Mrs. Henderson cornered me at the mailbox this morning. You know how she gets when she's excited, talking with her hands and everything. She said they're thinking of making you the Grand Marshal for next year's parade. Can you imagine? You'd get to ride in the lead car and wave at everyone. Jack's jaw tightened until the muscles in his neck stood out like cords. The cheerfulness in his daughter's voice felt like sandpaper against his raw nerves. He pushed his coffee mug away with more force than necessary, making some of the dark liquid slosh over the rim and spread across the scratched wooden table in a small, bitter pool. Dad? Emily's smile faltered as she noticed his rigid posture, the way his hands were clenched into fists on either side of his untouched breakfast. Her voice dropped to a whisper of concern. Are you okay? You look like you haven't slept. Just eat your breakfast, he muttered, his voice flat and distant as the gray clouds gathering outside the window. Emily pulled out her chair, the metal legs scraping against the floor, with a sound that seemed too loud in the sudden quiet. She moved carefully now, like she was walking through a room full of sleeping bears. Pouring herself a bowl of cereal, she tried to maintain her cheerful mood, but Jack could see the worry creeping into her dark eyes. Sarah's eyes. Claire said she might help me practice for the upcoming choir concert, Emily ventured, her voice smaller now but still hopeful. She knows all these breathing exercises that apparently help with stage nerves. She said Mom used to get nervous before singing too, but she had this trick where she'd... Enough. Jack's fist came down on the table like a judge's gavel, making the dishes rattle and dance. The salt shaker tipped over, spilling white crystals across the dark wood. Emily's spoon clattered against her bowl, and milk splashed onto her blue sweater. I don't want to hear about Claire or what she thinks she knows about your mother. Emily's face went white as fresh snow, hurt flooding her features like water filling a broken dam. Her hands trembled as she set down her spoon, and Jack caught a glimpse of the scared little girl she used to be, the one who would crawl into his bed during thunderstorms and whisper that she missed Mommy. What's wrong with you? She asked, her voice cracking. Yesterday you were fine with Claire being here. She's just trying to help us. She cares about us. Help? Jack let out a bitter laugh that sounded more like a bark. The sound seemed to echo off the kitchen walls, harsh and unfamiliar in their usually warm home. Like your mother needed help planning to run away? The words slipped out before he could stop them, sharp and cutting as broken glass. Emily's cereal bowl slipped from her fingers, clattering against the table. Milk spread across the surface, mixing with the spilled coffee in a murky mess. What are you talking about? Her voice was barely above a whisper now. She loved us. Jack pushed back from the table so hard his chair scraped against the wall behind him. He grabbed his worn leather jacket from the hook by the door, the one with the patch on the elbow where Emily had sewn it after he'd torn it on a rusty car part. I'm going to the garage, but it's Sunday, Emily protested, standing up so quickly her chair nearly tipped backward. The garage is closed on Sundays. You always said Sundays were for family, for rest, for rest. Things change, he snapped, his hand already on the doorknob. The metal felt cold against his palm, solid and real, in a world that suddenly felt like it was built on shifting sand. Just like people do, just like promises do. The door slammed behind him with a finality that seemed to shake the whole house. At the garage, Jack threw himself into work like a man possessed. He hadn't bothered rolling up the main door or flipping the hand-painted open sign that Emily had made him years ago, but he found plenty to occupy his restless hands and tormented mind. The familiar smell of motor oil and metal shavings usually calmed him, but today even his sanctuary felt tainted. He changed oil that didn't need changing, his movements sharp and efficient but lacking their usual care. He reorganized tools that were already organized, lining up wrenches by size with military precision. He cleaned parts that were already clean, scrubbing them until his knuckles were raw and bleeding. Anything to keep his hands busy and his mind from wandering to that letter, to Sarah's careful handwriting, to the words that had shattered everything he thought he knew about his life. The morning stretched into afternoon like taffy being pulled. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that slanted through the grimy windows, and somewhere outside, life went on as normal. He could hear the distant sound of the church bells calling people to Sunday service, the laughter of children playing in the park across the street, the low rumble of cars carrying families to Sunday dinners. He heard the familiar click of heels on concrete, a sound he'd grown to associate with hope and possibility, but which now made his stomach clench with dread. He knew without looking that Claire had found him, drawn by Emily's worry and her own stubborn determination to fix things that might be beyond repair. Jack? Her voice was gentle as a summer breeze, filled with the kind of concern that came from genuine caring. Emily called me. She's worried about you. She said you left without eating breakfast, without saying goodbye properly. He kept his back turned, focusing on tightening a bolt that was already secure, his movements precise but unnecessarily forceful. The wrench felt heavy in his hands, substantial and real in a way that emotions weren't. Go home, Claire. There's nothing for you here. Nothing but an old fool who can't even trust his own memories. We need to talk about Sarah's letter, what it really meant. What you might be misunderstanding. No. The word came out like a gunshot, echoing off the concrete walls and metal rafters. He spun around to face her, his eyes blazing with pain and anger. We don't need to talk about anything. You've done enough damage already. You've taken everything I thought I knew and turned it into lies. Claire took a step closer, her elegant features soft with compassion. She wore a simple sundress, the color of warm honey, and her hair caught the afternoon light streaming through the windows. Jack, I know this is hard, but you're not seeing the whole picture. That letter, both of you, just leave, he said, his voice hoarse with emotion and exhaustion. The words scraped against his throat like gravel. Please. I need to be alone. Jack Turner. Emily's voice cut through the tension like a blade. He hadn't heard her come in, hadn't noticed the sound of her sneakers on the concrete floor. She stood in the garage doorway like an avenging angel, her small frame backlit by the afternoon sunday. Her hands were balled into fists at her sides, and her chin was raised in defiance, a gesture he recognized from Sarah, from himself, from the stubborn Turner gene that ran through their family like a river. Emily, go home, he started, but she cut him off. No. Her voice cracked with emotion, but it carried the strength of someone who had already faced more loss than most adults. You listen to me for once, instead of running away like you always do when things get hard. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but her voice grew stronger with each word. You always tell me that Mom loved us. You say it every night when you tuck me in. Every time I miss her. Every time I ask why she had to leave us. Maybe the truth isn't perfect. Maybe she had doubts or fears or moments when she wanted something different. But she chose us, didn't she? She stayed. She loved us enough to stay. Jack's wrench slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers, clanging against the concrete floor. The sound echoed through the garage like a bell tolling, sharp and final and somehow heartbreaking. Emily's words hit him harder than any physical blow could have, cutting through the fog of anger and hurt to reach the part of him that still remembered how to hope. Maybe Mom wasn't perfect, Emily continued, her voice softening but losing none of its intensity. Maybe she had moments when she wondered about different choices, different lives. But we still have each other, Dad. We still have the love she left us, the family she chose to build with you. Don't throw that away because you're scared of being hurt again. The silence that followed was thick and heavy, broken only by the distant sound of traffic and the steady drip of a faucet somewhere in the back of the garage. Jack couldn't bring himself to pick up the fallen wrench or look directly at his daughter's tear-streaked face. The weight of her words settled over him like a blanket, warm and suffocating at the same time. Emily, Claire said softly, her voice thick with emotion. Maybe we should give your father some time to… Both of you. Just leave, Jack repeated, but the fight had gone out of his voice. He sounded tired now, defeated in a way that had nothing to do with the physical exhaustion of a hard day's work. Please. I need to think. Emily's footsteps retreated first, quick and angry, her sneakers squeaking against the polished concrete. She paused at the doorway, and he could feel her looking back at him, but he couldn't turn around, couldn't face the disappointment and hurt he knew he'd see in her eyes. Claire lingered a moment longer, her presence a warm spot in his peripheral vision. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but firm, carrying the weight of absolute conviction. Whatever you found in that letter, she said. Whatever words Sarah wrote in a moment of doubt or fear, it doesn't change who she became. It doesn't change who she chose to be, or the woman who loved you and Emily more than her own life. The Sarah I knew, the Sarah who saved me, she wasn't running away from anything. She was running toward the life she wanted most. Jack didn't respond, couldn't find words past the tightness in his throat. He heard Claire's heels click away across the concrete, measured and deliberate, then the heavy sound of the garage door being pulled shut behind her. Through the dusty windows, he watched her walk away, her elegant figure growing smaller against the backdrop of the afternoon Sunday. Emily appeared beside her, and Claire's arm went around the girl's shoulders in a gesture of comfort that should have been his to give. The wrench in his remaining hand trembled like a leaf in a windstorm. Guilt crashed over him in waves, each one stronger than the last. As he remembered Emily's stricken face, the way her voice had broken when she'd called him out for running away, he thought of Claire's patient concern, the way she'd tried to build bridges while he'd been busy burning them down. The letter in his pocket felt heavier than ever, but for the first time since finding it, he wondered if he was reading it all wrong. He stood alone in his garage, surrounded by the tools and machines he used to fix things every day, engines and transmissions, brake systems and electrical problems. all the broken things people brought to him, trusting in his ability to make them whole again. But as he looked around at his domain, at the place where he'd always felt most competent and useful, he realized with crushing clarity that the most important repairs couldn't be made with wrenches and screwdrivers. Some things required a different kind of tool entirely. Some things required faith. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the garage windows as Jack methodically worked on Mrs. Peterson's old Chevrolet. His calloused hands moved with practiced skill across the worn engine parts, but his mind wandered to darker places with each turn of the wrench. The letter he'd found 3 days ago haunted every waking moment, making even the simplest repair tasks feel heavy and wrong. Every bolt he tightened reminded him of how loose his grip on the truth had become. The rhythmic clanking of metal on metal filled the quiet space, punctuated only by the distant hum of traffic outside. Jack had always found comfort in the familiar sounds of his work, but today they felt hollow. He'd thrown himself into repairs since dawn, hoping the physical labor might quiet the storm in his head. It hadn't worked. The soft click of heels on concrete made him tense, his entire body going rigid. He didn't need to look up to know it was Claire. Those measured footsteps had become as familiar as his own heartbeat over the past weeks, but now they felt like an invasion. "Jack," she said quietly, her voice carrying across the oil-stained floor. "We need to talk." "Garage is closed," he muttered, keeping his eyes fixed on the engine's grimy interior. His knuckles had gone white around the wrench handle. "Sign's right there on the door. I'm not leaving until you hear me out." Claire's voice was gentle but carried an unmistakable steel beneath the softness. She pulled up a worn shop stool that had seen better days and sat down, carefully smoothing her navy skirt around her knees. "You can keep working if you want, but I'm staying right here until we get this sorted." Jack's wrench slipped suddenly, clattering against the metal with a sharp ring that echoed through the garage. He cursed under his breath, finally looking up at her with eyes that blazed with barely contained pain. Claire's face showed nothing but patience and understanding, which somehow made the fire in his chest burn even hotter. "What's left to say?" His voice came out harsh and ragged, like sandpaper on wood. "I found the letter, Claire. Sarah wanted to leave me. She wanted to leave everything we built together. End of story." Claire shook her head slowly, her silver hair catching the afternoon light. "No, Jack, that's not the end. That's not even close to the whole story." She reached into her worn leather purse with deliberate care and pulled out a small leather-bound book, its edges soft with age. "Sarah shared something with me years ago, during one of our long conversations by the lake. I think it's time you saw it too." Jack wiped his greasy hands on a shop rag, his movements sharp and agitated. He eyed the book like it might bite him. "What is that?" "Sarah's journal, the one she kept the summer before Emily was born." Claire held it out toward him, her hands steady despite the weight of what she was offering. "The letter you found? It was never sent, Jack. Never mailed, because Sarah changed her mind. Actually, she changed more than her mind. She found her faith again. Through you. Through the man you showed her you were every single day." Jack hesitated, his work-roughened hands hovering over the journal. When he finally took it, his hands trembled slightly as he opened it to where Claire had carefully marked a page with a faded ribbon. Sarah's familiar handwriting filled the lines in blue ink, and his throat tightened at the sight. He could almost hear her voice in the loops and curves of each letter. "Read it," Claire urged softly, leaning forward on her stool. "Please, Jack." "She needs you to hear this." Jack cleared his throat roughly and began to read aloud, his voice thick with emotion that threatened to choke off his words. "Sometimes love isn't just about feelings. It's about choices we make every morning when we wake up. Today I watched Jack help old Mr. Wilson with his broken tractor, refusing payment even though we barely have enough for groceries this month. He just smiled that quiet smile of his and said everyone deserves a helping hand sometimes." He paused, swallowing hard against the tightness in his throat. Claire nodded encouragingly, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. "That's when I knew," he continued reading, his voice growing stronger with each word. "All my doubts about small-town life, all my restless dreams of something bigger than this place, they don't compare to the simple goodness I see in him every single day. Jack is the man I choose every day, not just the man I fell in love with. His kindness, his quiet strength, his unwavering faith in people. These things are worth more than any adventure I thought I wanted." Jack's voice cracked on the last words, the journal trembling in his hands. He sat heavily on a nearby workbench, the leather-bound book open in his lap like a fragile bird. She was scared, Jack, Claire explained gently, sliding her stool closer. Not of you. Never of you. She was scared of settling for what she thought was a small life, of losing herself in this town. But you showed her something different. You showed her that true greatness isn't about where you live or what job you have. It's about how you love people, how you serve your community, how you choose kindness when no one's looking. Why didn't she ever tell me about these doubts? Jack whispered, his finger tracing the edge of a page. Why didn't she trust me enough to share this? Because she was ashamed of ever doubting what you had together. Because she knew it would hurt you to learn she'd ever wanted anything else. Claire moved even closer, her voice soft but intense. But mostly because once she chose you, really truly chose you with her whole heart, those doubts became nothing more than shadows of who she used to be. Jack stared at the journal, his calloused finger tracing Sarah's careful words. I've been so angry, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. At her, at you, at myself, at God, if I'm being honest, I thought. I thought everything I believed about our marriage was built on lies. No, Claire said firmly, reaching out to touch his arm. The truth is that your love was strong enough to overcome her doubts. Your daily kindness showed her what real love looks like. That's not a lie, Jack. That's a testament to what you built together, brick by brick, day by day. The dam finally broke. Tears began to fall onto the journal's yellowed pages, each drop carrying years of stored grief. Jack didn't bother wiping them away. All the strength he'd forced himself to maintain, all the times he'd held everything together for Emily's sake, all the nights he'd lain awake, wondering if he'd been enough, it all came crashing down at once. His broad shoulders shook with silent sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. A small, sharp gasp from the doorway made them both look up quickly. Emily stood there in her school clothes, her backpack sliding off one shoulder. Her eyes were wide with worry, and for a moment, with the afternoon light behind her, she looked so much like Sarah that Jack's heart clenched painfully. "Dad?" she whispered, her young voice trembling with concern. Jack didn't hesitate. He opened his arms wide, and Emily ran to him like she had when she was small and frightened by thunderstorms. She wrapped herself in his embrace, and he held her tight against his chest, one hand still gripping Sarah's journal like a lifeline. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," he murmured into her soft hair, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I'm so sorry for pushing you away these past few days. You didn't deserve that." "It's okay, Dad," Emily said, her voice muffled against his work shirt. "I understand now. Mom loved us both, didn't she?" Even when she was scared, Claire stood quietly beside them, watching father and daughter with tears streaming down her cheeks. The late afternoon sun streamed through the dusty garage windows, bathing them all in warm, golden light that seemed to wrap around them like a blessing. No one spoke for several long moments. They didn't need to. The silence held all their grief, their forgiveness, and their healing. Finally, Emily pulled back slightly, keeping one arm around her father's shoulders. She reached out her other hand to Claire, who stepped forward without hesitation and took it. The three of them stood together in the golden light, connected by Sarah's memory and their own newly forged bonds of trust and understanding. Jack looked down at the journal in his lap, at Sarah's words about choosing love every day like a sacred promise. For the first time since finding that terrible letter, he felt peace settling over his heart like a warm blanket. Sarah hadn't just stayed out of duty or obligation. She had chosen him, chosen their life together, chosen the love they shared with her whole heart and soul. That truth was worth more than all his doubts, stronger than all his fears, and deeper than any pain he'd carried. A soft autumn breeze rustled through the open garage door as Jack Turner leaned over the engine of the used Honda Civic he'd bought for Emily. The late afternoon sun cast warm shadows across the concrete floor, and the familiar scent of motor oil and metal filled the air. Emily stood beside him, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, eagerly holding out a wrench. "This one, right, Dad?" she asked, her eyes bright with interest. Jack smiled, taking the tool. "Perfect choice, sweetheart. See how the timing belt needs adjusting here?" He pointed to the component, and Emily leaned in closer, her face scrunched in concentration. "It looks worn out," she observed. "Good eye." Jack nodded approvingly. "That's why we're replacing it today. Don't want you breaking down on some dark road." His voice caught slightly at the thought, and Emily squeezed his arm. "Like Mom's car that night?" she asked softly. Jack paused, then nodded. "Yeah, like that." He took a deep breath and continued working, showing Emily how to properly tension the new belt. "But this car's going to be safe. I promise you that." The sound of approaching footsteps made them both look up. Claire stood in the garage doorway, holding a large paper bag that smelled wonderful. She wore a simple blue dress today, her usual elegance somehow fitting perfectly in the working-class setting. "I thought you two might be hungry," she said, smiling. "I brought sandwiches from May's Diner." Emily's face lit up. "The Turkey Club ones? With extra pickles, just how you like them." Claire set the bag down on Jack's workbench, carefully moving aside some tools to make space. Jack wiped his hands on a shop rag. "You didn't have to do that, Claire." "I wanted to," she replied simply. "Besides, I love seeing you two work together like this." They settled around the workbench, pulling up various shop stools. Claire distributed the sandwiches while Emily got sodas from the small fridge in the corner. The garage, usually filled with the sounds of tools and engines, now echoed with the comfortable rustling of paper bags and quiet conversation. "Remember when you first showed up here?" Emily asked Claire between bites. "Dad was so grumpy." "I wasn't grumpy," Jack protested, though his eyes crinkled with amusement. "I was. Cautious." Claire laughed. "That's a diplomatic way of putting it." She turned serious for a moment. "But I understand why now. You were protecting something precious." Jack set down his sandwich, meeting Claire's eyes. "I need to thank you properly, Claire, for being honest with us, for caring about Emily." He glanced at his daughter. "For helping us understand Sarah better." Emily reached across the bench and squeezed his hand. "Mom wasn't perfect, Dad. But neither are we. And that's okay." "When did you get so wise?" Jack asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Must be all those choir practices," Claire teased, lightening the moment. Music feeds the soul. They continued eating, sharing stories, and gentle laughter. Through the open garage door, Jack could see Mrs. Henderson walking her dog, waving warmly at Claire as she passed. Last week, she'd brought Claire's name up for the town's festival committee. The same people who'd whispered and stared were now seeing Claire for who she really was, someone who genuinely cared about their community. After lunch, they returned to work on the car. Claire rolled up her sleeves and asked questions, genuinely interested in learning. Jack explained each step, his teacher's heart warming at having two eager students. The afternoon passed quickly, filled with the satisfying work of making something better. As the sun began to set, the first drops of a gentle rain started falling outside. Jack made the final adjustments to the engine, his movements precise and careful. The soft patter of rain created a peaceful backdrop to their work. "Try it now," Jack said, stepping back from the car. Emily slid into the driver's seat, her hands trembling slightly with excitement as she turned the key. The engine purred to life, running smoother than it had when they'd bought it. The sound filled the garage with promise. Emily jumped out and threw her arms around Jack, nearly knocking him off balance. "It's perfect, Dad," she exclaimed. "With a do see?" Then, more softly, her voice muffling against his shoulder, "Mom would be proud." Jack held his daughter close, tears welling in his eyes as he looked over her head at Claire, who watched them with a gentle smile. "So am I," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. The rain continued its gentle symphony outside, but inside the garage, all was warm and bright. The light from the overhead lamps cast a golden glow over the father and daughter, the newly repaired car, and the friend who had helped them heal. The storm that had brought them all together had finally passed, leaving behind something stronger than before. If this story touched your heart even just a little, take a moment. Breathe it in, because sometimes the most powerful symphonies are born from silence, and the most extraordinary lives begin with the courage to start again. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? And what part of Jack and Emily's journey resonated with you most? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your words inspire more than you know. If you believe in stories that heal, uplift, and remind us of the quiet strength in everyday people, Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's coming next. And from the bottom of my heart, thank you for watching. Your time, your presence, your kindness, they mean the world. Until the next story, stay kind, stay brave, and never stop listening.